Let's go when you're ready. Good evening, councillors and members of the public. My name is Councillor Tony Page and I'm going to be chairing the Policy Committee this evening in the absence of the Leader of the Council, Councillor Jason Brock. And I'd like to welcome you to the Policy Committee, which is again being held as an online meeting. I will shortly ask members of the committee to introduce themselves for the benefit of the public and also to ensure that all are in attendance as expected and can hear and speak to the meeting. As ever, it's possible that loss of connection may happen, but as long as we have 3 members still in the meeting, we will be quorate. Could I remind members and officers to put their microphones on mute when you are not speaking? When called to speak, you should unmute your microphone and pause briefly to allow for the slight time delay. You must also remember to put your camera on before being called to speak, otherwise you will not be visible on the screen during your contribution, and others may find it helpful to switch their cameras off when they're not speaking as well. As with previous meetings, I will ask members individually at the end of the debate on each report to state whether they are for, against or wish to abstain from the recommendation before them. I'll now do a roll call of councillors. Please could you all put your camera on now so that you're ready to appear on screen to introduce yourselves to the meeting. I'm Councillor Tony Page, Vice Chair of the Policy Committee and Deputy Leader of the Council, and also lead member for Strategic Environment, Planning and Transport. And I'll now call on the other members of the committee alphabetically. Councillor Barnett-Ward.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Adele Barnett-Ward, lead member for Neighbourhoods and Communities.
Thank you. Councillor Duveen.
Ricky Devine, Tilehurst Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Emberson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Ellie Emberson, lead member for Corporate and Consumer Services.
Thank you. Councillor Ennis.
Thank you. Councillor John Ennis, lead councillor for Housing and a Southcote councillor.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Jones, lead member for Adult Social Care.
Thank you. Councillor Rowland.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Karen Rowland, lead member for Culture, Heritage and Recreation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Skeets.
Good evening. Councillor Jeanette Skeets, councillor for Thames Ward and leader of the Conservative Group.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens.
Good evening, everybody. I'm David Stevens, councillor for Thames Ward and chairman of the Audit and Governance Committee.
And lastly, Councillor White.
Evening, everyone. Councillor Rob White, Park Ward councillor and leader of the Green Group of Councillors.
Thank you, councillors. We're also joined this evening by representatives of the Thames Valley Police, who will shortly be providing us with our annual presentation of their performance over the past year. I'd therefore like to welcome the Police and Crime Commissioner Anthony Stansfeld, John Campbell, the Chief Constable, and Superintendent John, the Area Commander for Reading. I'd also like to introduce you to the officers who are in attendance tonight. I'll just read through who those are. There's Peter Sloman, the Council's Chief Executive, Jackie Yates, the Executive Director of Resources and the Chief Financial Officer, Francis Martin, Executive Director of Economic Growth and Neighbourhood Services, Shona Douglas is Executive Director of Adult Social Care and Health Services, Mike Graham is the Assistant Director of Legal and Democratic Services as well as the Monitoring Officer, Peter Robinson is the Interim Assistant Director of Finance, Melissa Wise, Assistant Director for Commissioning, Transformation and Performance, Zelda Wolfley is Assistant Director for Housing and Communities, George Framalico is Deputy Director for Planning, Transport and Regulatory Services, Ben Burford is the Sustainability Manager, Donna Pentelow is Assistant Director for Culture, and Mark Warringham is Planning Policy Team Leader. On then to the agenda, item 6, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from members? I've not been notified of any. No. Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting held on 14th December have been circulated. Can those be agreed a correct record?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Petitions and questions. There are no petitions. There are no public questions, but there are 2 councillor questions from Councillor White. The first to Councillor Hoskin, the lead councillor for health. I will be dealing with the reply on Councillor Hoskin's behalf. But Councillor White, would you like to put your first question, please?
Thank you, Councillor Page. This question is on the COVID-19 vaccine rollout in Reading. Please can the lead councillor update me on the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine in Reading? In particular, what are the local challenges? And does the lead councillor agree with me that as well as prioritising the most vulnerable in society, frontline workers such as teachers should be also prioritised?
Thank you, Councillor White. On behalf of Councillor Graham Hoskin, the lead councillor for health, wellbeing and sport, I will read out the reply. A delivery of the vaccination programme is being led by our colleagues in the NHS and organised at the West Berkshire West footprint. 3 routes of vaccination are being used. Firstly, hospital hubs. Secondly, GP surgeries, often 1 surgery used per primary care network. And thirdly, mass vaccination sites. Rollout via all 3 is progressing well locally, with our hospital hubs in Wokingham and at the Royal Berks delivering vaccine to frontline health and social care staff. Every local primary care network is now offering vaccine to over 80s and care home residents before moving through subsequent priority groups that have been determined nationally. Residents will be directly contacted by the NHS when it's their turn for vaccination and do not need to proactively contact their GP to request vaccination. A mass vaccination site will be going live in the coming weeks. It is clear that the mass rollout of vaccination needs to ramp up hugely over the coming weeks if government promises on this are to be kept. Unfortunately, and somewhat ridiculously, the NHS are not at the moment allowing us to publicly share specific vaccine delivery numbers. A regular update on progress from the NHS to councillors and MPs is promised, but has not been seen yet. I agree that vaccinating frontline workers is important. This is why we have the vaccine available at the 2 hospital hub sites I've mentioned, and these sites are delivering vaccine to the frontline health and social care staff in line with the relevant national guidance. This includes staff that work for the NHS, council, commission providers and the voluntary and community sector. Furthermore, I strongly believe the government need to remember all essential frontline workers who put themselves in harm's way in order to ensure our town continues to function. This includes school staff, drivers, shop workers, police, firefighters and frontline council staff, but probably not MPs, as suggested by the Conservative MP for Winchester. Our lead councillor for education, Ashley Pearce, and Matt Rodder MP, the MP for Reading East, have publicly supported the Reading Secondary School leaders' call for school staff to be prioritised for the vaccine, whilst we, the council and Brighter Futures for Children, have made representations to the Department for Education as well. In terms of challenges, it's not only about the logistics of rollout or vaccine supply chains, but ensuring we communicate and engage with people effectively about the vaccine and address residents' concerns or misinformation they might receive. For example, we and NHS colleagues are regularly explaining that although it has been developed at pace to strengthen our pandemic response, the vaccine is safe, has passed all the usual regulatory checks, and there is strong evidence of its effectiveness. It is also true that for those who are vaccinated, they still need to follow the same lockdown and hands face space rules as everyone else, as they can still inadvertently pass the virus on to others and no vaccine will provide 100% immunity. End of answer. Councillor White, do you have a supplementary?
Good to hear that thank you for the answer, Councillor Page, and good to hear that the council is making the case for teachers and other frontline workers to be vaccinated as a priority. No supplementary question.
Can I just draw your attention, in Councillor White and colleagues, to the press release we published today about the new walk-through COVID testing site opening at Prospect Park. This is not a vaccination site, I accept, but can I just draw that latest press release to colleagues' attention, and that's been circulated to everyone. Can we move to your second question, Councillor White, which is to Councillor John Ennis, the lead for housing. Over to you, Councillor White.
Thank you, Councillor Page. This question is on long-term empty council properties. Council-owned 117 Cumberland Road has now been empty for approximately 4 years. Can the council confirm how many long-term empty properties it has and why this property has been empty for so long when Reading is in a housing crisis?
Councillor Ennis.
Yep, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor White, for your question. I have the answer here. The housing crisis in Reading is a long-standing challenge and remains a priority for this administration. As you will be aware, the new Affordable Housing SPD has recently been consulted on. When approved, it will enable us to secure some truly affordable housing as a result of the private developments in the town. Also, the council's own new build scheme continues to progress with contractors on site for 31 homes, starts on site in the spring for a further 127 homes, and planning obtained for another 23. A total of 181 new council homes in the next 3 years. Reviewing the council-owned assets has formed part of a strategic review to enable the council to maximise the value from sites and help meet its priority for improving access to decent housing. 117 Cumberland Road has formed part of this review, and the site is likely to be developed in 2021. In terms of council-owned homes, there are currently 45 long-term empty properties as follows. 26 are within the D Park regeneration area and due for demolition as part of the development. 11 have structural issues and solution estate renewal options are being considered. 4 are being used as show flats for trialling and demonstrating new environmental measures we are looking to install. 3 are general fund properties that have not previously been used for social housing, although options are being considered for these to be converted, and this includes 117 Cumberland Road, the Willows, which is due to be discussed elsewhere on this agenda. 1 home is being held to support a project being delivered by Brighter Futures for Children. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ennis. Councillor White, have you got a supplementary?
Yes, please, Chair. Thanks for the answer. It mentions the strategic review. Given that Reading is in a housing crisis, can Councillor Ennis clarify why, as I asked in my question, it has taken 4 years to identify that 117 Cumberland Road, which is a terraced house, could be used as a home?
Councillor Ennis.
Yeah, thanks for that. As in the answer, Cumberland Road is part of the general fund, which we will be looking at to move into the housing revenue account, along with other pieces of land which we'll be discussing tonight. That will be likely to be developed this year in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ennis. There are no further questions, which takes us on to item 9, the decision book reports. 2 are reported here for noting. can those be noted, please?
Noted.
Okay, thank you. Which brings us on then to item 10, which is the presentation from the Thames Valley Police. As I said earlier, we have the Police and Crime Commissioner, Anthony Stansfeld. We've got the Chief Constable, John Campbell, and the LPA Commander, Nick John. With us, they're listed here on the screen. And we've also got a slide presentation. There it is. So I will hand over to you, Chief Constable, and then I presume that, Anthony, you've got you'd like to say something. Are you going to come in at the very end or during the presentation? I meant to ask you that earlier.
No, I think Chief Constable will give the presentation, and if anything that I particularly want to comment on comes up in the questions, then I'll do my best to answer them.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, John, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And my understanding is I've got around 25 minutes for this presentation. Would that be right?
Yes, if you can keep it to that, that would be appreciated.
Oh,
Because we've got questions for you as well.
Yeah, okay. Thanks. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the invite, as always. Let's hope that I am with you all personally next year for a whole host of reasons, but very much thank you for the invite. Also, just as a general point, thank you very much for the support, both vocal and practically, that the local authority give to my police officers in the town. I get a sense of a real partnership between Reading Borough Council and the police, and long may that continue. If I could go on to the slide that says since we last met, which is the second slide in. I joined the local authority council meeting some time ago now, given the cycle of these meetings, and I think that was within the first 6 months or so since I become chief. It was very keen to just say where I was looking to put extra work and investment into, and we benefited from additional funding at the time from Precept. Local policing and investigations. Local policing is Nick's world, the local policing areas and investigations. So Thames Valley Police has a very long history of carrying out very effective larger scale investigations. I think for a whole host of reasons we needed to do more around our volume investigations. That's the 24-hour local crime that is dealt with by Nick and his team, and also contact management, and I'll come on to 101 and call handling in due course. Next slide, please. Part of that involved us changing the shift patterns within local policing, and that involved having more people available on our response teams and moving them out some of the other structures that we had. So in effect that increased patrol numbers, and that would be particularly noticeable on nights as well. And I'm pleased to say in that first year that we did that, our arrests generally across the force increased by around 13%, similar kind of numbers within Reading. And also stop and search increased by 58%. Now, stop and search, as we know, has to be used carefully. We have to treat people with dignity and respect. We have a number of checks and balances around stop and search. You'll have no doubt be aware and also briefed on some of these Section 60 searches. This is where we do searches in a defined geographical area because of intelligence or because of previous crime. We've had to do a few of those in Reading, but again, largely received strong support. It's important that we're explaining to members of the public and yourselves exactly why we think we need to do that. And there's good scrutiny. We have an independent stop and search group made up of members of the public that can view any body-worn video of any of my officers whenever they wish, which hopefully gives reassurance that we're doing it in the right way, because we do recognise the impact of the power if it's not handled carefully. Next slide, please. Part of the restructuring also involved the deployment of officers that have previously been in a forced crime unit down to local area. So Nick has now had an increase of detectives over the last year or so since April. There were force teams are very useful in certain areas. We have a major crime team that deals with murders. We have force teams that deal with high risk domestic abuse, etc. But for certain core crime, if you like, and the type of stuff that is very important to local communities, my view is that I want to give as many resources as I can to local command so they can use it accordingly. So we've seen an increase in resources locally to Nick and across the force area. Well, I'm pleased to say that that final line at the bottom is about outcomes. Outcomes is the new term for detections. It's criminal justice outcomes. It could be a range of things. Could be in court, could be a caution, could be a community resolution. But in effect, over the last year, we've seen an increase of around about 26% across the Thames Valley. Nick's going to talk a little bit more about local crime figures as he does his input, which is encouraging really, because that's people that's around 4,000 extra people this year that have had some form of sanction or justice for being wronged, and long may that continue. I want to see that getting better as well. Next slide, please. One of the things that often comes up, and it was a question that was raised by one of the councillors, and I'm happy to answer anything more at the end if I don't cover this off, was 101. Certainly in 2018, 101 was a particular issue for us, and by that it was at the kind of numbers where the average wait time at one stage was 7 minutes or so, which was unacceptable, and no one would disagree with that. Number of factors for that, all my issues rather than anybody else's, if you like. It was recruitment, it was increasing demand, but we managed to put additional resources based on some of the funding from the PCC into contact management. You'll see now that the year-to-date average for 101, of course, we need to remind 101 is a non-emergency number. So it is in the same, it might be in the same bracket as 111 or any call centre applications. If a crime is happening in practice, then it's a 999 call. But you can see that the average time is 119 seconds. It's 2 minutes, isn't it, in normal speak? 119 seconds. I'm pleased to say that in December, our most recent data shows that the average call handling time throughout the whole of December for 101 was 32 seconds. Now, depending on the time that you might call, you might find that there are other competing demands at that particular time. And obviously we try and protect the nines because that's where we're getting calls to people in crisis. And that was on average 3 seconds to answer a 999 call. So we definitely have made improvements. I want to see that consistency of approach. I think there's definitely an echo of people's views about 101, but I also think generally there are times when people will struggle depending on when they call us. And also that feedback loop of when people contact us, making sure that people realise that we do care about their call and it's important to us, and that's something that we can always improve upon. Next slide, please. This is just a graph really that shows the impact. So right in the middle, you'll see that big spike in 2018. That was the call handling, wicked warm hot summer, and some resourcing issues. And then to the right, you'll see how the numbers are coming down. So the green mark is the actual 101, and the blue is the 999 calls, and the axis for that is on the left hand side. So making progress. I want to see consistency around that, and obviously still keen to hear any concerns that people might have if that doesn't reflect their experiences, but it is working a lot better than it was. One of the reasons, if I could go on to the next slide, which is online reporting, is that we have seen a big increase in the numbers of people that are using our online services. So this is your ability to report a crime or an incident. It certainly suits people's needs, no doubt about that. Many people are quite happy to report online. Again, the challenge for us is making sure that the feedback loop back into the member of the public is as it should be, so that they feel that they are being listened to. You'll see the difference between the 2 years. So April to December, 28,000 online reports in 2019, and you'll see in 2020 that's up to 88,000. So significant progress. But again, that feedback loop is very important. Okay, next slide, please. That should be a slide with Andrew Harper. I put it on there just to, first of all, thank everybody for the kind words of support over the last 18 months or so following his death. The final conclusion to that trial, the appeal process, was held before Christmas, where both the prosecution appealed on the grounds that the sentencing of those convicted of his manslaughter was too light, and the defendants also appealed that it was too harsh. The outcome of that was the Court of Appeal concluded that the sentences given at the time were appropriate, and that has put an end to this matter from the judicial process. But thank you very much for your support. Next slide, please. I put this as reference to the number of protests that we have had across the force area over the summer. Of course, this is during a COVID challenge as well, and you can see that certainly up until the middle of December, we'd had 148 protests and demonstrations across the force in various formats. And it's a whole range, thankfully, in a vibrant democracy, of reasons why people might want to protest. And long may that continue. It's a work load for us. We're there to facilitate peaceful protest and make sure all views are heard in a peaceful and lawful way, and we will continue to do that. You'll see that a number of those were part of the Black Lives Matter protests, and we had 49 of those. I think there were 3 in Reading. What we were keen to do is that, I mean, obviously not all the matters around Black Lives Matter were necessarily directed towards the police, and obviously the catalyst was the events that occurred and the death of George Floyd in the States. But of course, policing will be a focus, and quite rightly so. But other areas are obviously subject to people's views of discrimination or bias, real or perceived, as people's lived experiences can be. Certainly from our point of view, very keen to work with anybody who wants to hold us to account, challenge us, see how we can do things better. And certainly we have used some of the protest organisers across the force to now become part of our independent advisory groups, part of our scrutiny groups, and hopefully give them an insight into policing. Very pleased to say that all of the protests across the Thames Valley passed off without incident, and as far as I'm aware, there were no arrests at all. But the agenda around that Black Lives Matter is very alive within policing, national responses and local. And I'll come on to some of the recruitment that we're doing around our Black, Asian, minority ethnic officers and staff in a little while. Next slide, please. I mentioned HS2 and Extinction Rebellion as part of that protest activity, and it's because, in essence, on occasion, I will have to draw resources away from Nick and his local team to police matters that are going on elsewhere in the force. It's an unfortunate reality of, if you like, a complex policing environment. So HS2, which has an impact primarily in Buckinghamshire and a little bit of Oxfordshire, is in effect the rail development. And there are a number of different types of protests. Certainly local people who feel that their community is being damaged by what they see and the development, and also we do have a group of protesters that will go from different types of protests. So they might be protesting fracking, Heathrow, and then they'll come and protest HS2 development. Significant amount of resourcing that has to go into this. At one stage during about a 4 or 5 week period, we had to mobilise 4 times from across the force and deploy 80 or 90 officers in order to deal with the protests. And some of those protests were violent, and we had officers who had urine thrown at them. We had an officer who was in a cherry picker trying to get a protester down, and they removed the hydraulic pipe. So there is no doubt that this is going to be a policing challenge for us for a number of years to come. 2030 is the anticipated delivery date for HS2. We have the largest footprint of any force in the country because of the nature of where the tracks are going through and the associated infrastructure. So it's something that we keep in mind. My job, and that I know I have the support of the Police and Crime Commission in this regard, is making a strong case to government and to others who have an economic potential to us to recover resources from, is to make the case that, you know, this type of development, we want to minimise the impact on local people as much as we possibly could in terms of the policing service that they get. Next slide, please. Operation Venetic. This is a national and international policing operation that you may have heard of some about. This is where policing cracked a code, an encrypted code, for a number of potentially normally drug dealers, and we managed to crack the code for that in respect to the encrypted devices they were using. Ongoing investigations, significant arrests made across the Thames Valley, and significant work around organised crime groups and CVLs continue in Reading as well. Thank you. Next slide, please. Well, this is a slide that obviously is much more raw and tragically familiar to you than some of the other council meetings I do. You'll be aware of these terrible circumstances. The defendant, Sadala, pleaded guilty to 3 counts of attempt murder and 3 murder charges. And then, as you're aware, just before Christmas, that went to a hearing to decide on his motivation for the killings and also to consider sentencing. And we received significant sentences, well, he did, in respect to both of the 3 individuals and the 3 men that were subject to the attempt murder, and also for those who tragically lost their lives. And obviously the judge was of the view that the motivation was terrorism in this regard. So a number of us met at various memorial ceremonies, but again, Nick and I are very appreciative of the support we get for our distinct role as police officers and the response and the investigation work with the other blue lights, but also the ongoing work. And we will continue to work with you all to make sure that we can minimise that longer term impact on the community around such a terrible, terrible crime. But thank you for that. Next slide, please. Operation Restore is the term that we use to describe our COVID response. So back in the 31st of January, Thames Valley Police were involved in the repatriation of the UK nationals from Wuhan. It seems a terribly long time ago, and since that time, you'll appreciate we are all far too familiar with this terrible virus. In terms of policing, next slide please, it's been a consistent approach, and I think the right approach, which is engage, explain, encourage and enforce as a last option. We are mindful that there is a life and a world after COVID, so we want to maintain the community trust. We have a role to play to support the NHS in terms of enforcement. Certainly our approach has been the strategy that you see before you. It has changed more recently. I guess you've heard about a lot of reporting. There's a point at which we have to collectively accept that there are people that are just willfully disobeying what appears to be pretty sound medical advice, particularly when they're engaging in large parties and indoor events or public space events. And that's really where our work is from a policing point of view. We have responsibilities around some of the enforcement, around quarantining, track and trace. That comes to us from other agencies. But we continue generally to approach it in this way and only enforce where we actually have to. The fixed penalty notices are not a measure of success. It's compliance that's a measure of success. So if we're able to resolve it with words of advice and move everybody on, we will. When we believe it's an egregious breach and people are just unwilling to comply with the legislation, then I'm afraid if they're not prepared to learn and do it of their own free will, that's where the enforcement comes in. You'll see the next slide, please, which is a little bit about the actual metrics around this. So when we say COVID-related crimes, well, that's where COVID's mentioned in a crime type. So it's a little bit of a proxy indicator. But you can see in and around that 210 of those in Reading since the start of the COVID epidemic. We've dealt with around about 44,000 related incidents, and we continue to do that every day. And you'll see that fixed penalty notices around about the 1,000 mark as of the last run we did, and of those 92 were in Reading. Certainly the first wave predominantly focused on younger people that were in breach in and around travelling for no lawful reason or being in cars together, and I still think we see a fair amount of that. Thank you. Next slide, please. A little bit about officer assaults, and I just put this in for context. So between this time and last year, we've seen an increase of 30% in assaults on your and my officers. You'll see 112 of those assaults in Reading. Now, what I would say is, of course, the numbers of officers that are in position where there might be assaults is relatively small. So, you know, it's the response officers, patrol officers, and some of our neighbourhood policing officers as well. And you'll see that 26 of those assaults were in Reading were COVID related, and that involves spitting and coughing at officers. I'm pleased to say from the start, the support from the criminal justice system, and particularly the courts, has been very, very strong for those that want to assault emergency workers. And we've seen generally custodial sentences around about 6 weeks or so. Next slide, please. Officer uplift. Well, we had confirmed in the budget before Christmas, in terms of the spending review, that the commitment from the government to increase police numbers was going to continue. This is a 20,000 figure. It'll take us 2 to 3 years to get up to those kind of numbers. So we have to recruit, train, and then deploy. Part of that welcome news in terms of those numbers is a desire to make sure we're taking as much opportunity as we can to increase our Black, Asian, minority, ethnic officers and staff within the force. We don't often get these bulk opportunities to really do something around that. Prior to it coming in, we had created a positive action engagement team made up of BAME officers who have the lived experience of being a police officer in Thames Valley Police. They can encourage others to join. They've got an understanding and insight into how individual communities may feel, and individual officers, and the challenges that they might have if they wanted to be a police officer in the Thames Valley. And you'll see when we opened up recruitment in June, which was after the terrible George Floyd incident, that I was encouraged to see that 23% were from a BAME background, which was encouraging, and we continue to work hard. And certainly this year we have seen an almost doubling of our numbers of those people going through recruiting in and around Black, Asian, minority ethnic. It's not enough. It's not as much as I would want, but it's certainly progress, and we will continue to drive a number of strategies through and look at ways that we can make sure we've got a kind of representative workforce of the communities that we serve, because it's so important for legitimacy and understanding as well. We're also doing some work actually within Reading itself, where we are we are working with, in as well as looking for, diversity of, if you like, ethnicity, we're also looking for diversity of background, because we should represent the police, the communities that we serve, and making sure we're an opportunity for people to have great careers and enjoy working. So we are working with a number of different schools within Reading area, just to encourage people to think about policing and make sure we've got the right kind of officers and staff that you would want to police you. Okay, next slide, please. This is a slide which is around about crime survey of England and Wales. The question is, taking into account our confidence in the police in this area. So I think that's quite a good context. And you'll see the green bar is Thames Valley Police, the blue is forces that are similar to us, and the national is orange. So we are better than some, but I take that into account for context. But the only real measure that's important is what you and yours think of Thames Valley Police, and as long as that's high and remains high, and then what other forces are doing has less interest to me. Okay, I'll hand over to Nick, who's going to take you through some of the very local projects, and then just one more slide from me, Chair.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Chair, thank you, Chief. I'd like to start, if I may, Chair, just by reiterating some of the comments of Mr. Campbell with regards to, I've been in post now for just over 10 months, and there's been a significant number of challenges, some of which the Chief Constable's alluded to in the first few slides. And I want to reiterate the thanks and the recognition for the support and advice and engagement from yourselves across the last 10 months in what we're dealing with. What I want to do now is just give a bit of a local context to some of the points raised previously. So when we look at some of the enforcement activity, there have been countless operations across Reading in the last 12 months, but these are just two of the bigger ones that respond directly to some of the major issues. Haute Mesure was our response to an increase in violent crime, and this was a borough-wide issue. It led to a significant number of arrests, 7 outlined there for a number of violent criminals, as well as 15 non-CJ outcomes, and by that I'm meaning out of court disposals, community resolutions, and ultimately to enable us to respond to some of the increase in violent crime. We saw a significant amount of officers on the streets, high visible patrols, working with our partners, ensuring that we're actually in the areas and visible at the times when the crimes were happening. As part of that operation, I also authorised Section 60 that the Chief Constable mentioned earlier, and that resulted in 50 stop and searches. And again, with that, we have a standing item at the Independent Advisory Group whereby we talk about stop and searches. We look at any disproportionality just in case there has been, and we fed that back into that operation. And that saw a significant decrease in violent crime for the period of that operation. Op Extrados was one that was more focused on the west of Reading and the Oxford Road area, and that was looking at drugs and violence, and again looking at organised crime nominals specifically. And that was again an operation that was run and coordinated out of Reading, a number of overt and covert aspects to that. Again, high visibility patrolling, a lot of use of our more covert assets across Thames Valley, and again, like Haute Mesure, saw a significant support from the wider organisation. And again, for that period, we saw a 23% reduction in violent crime along west of Reading. If we may move on to the next slide, please. So again, in relation to those, we've also carried out some more shorter operations. So Op Rebus is a locally run operation that was designed at providing a better service and better outcomes for victims of crime. And that's, again, as it says there, utilising a number of detectives from across the organisation to support Reading in assisting our uniformed colleagues in providing an increased standard and generating more solved crimes. And we have seen a significant increase across Reading. So in the last few months, we've seen an additional 200 crimes solved. And that's 200 victims where we've been able to give an element of support and hopefully a bit of closure and somebody apprehended for their crimes. As far as cash detention orders, Reading has been very successful, over £304,000 in cash detention orders, the best performing LPA in Thames Valley. And some of you will be aware that I had a number of conversations, certainly across the south of Reading and the west of Reading, in relation to a number of serious knife crime offences, GBHs, that we had across the summer, related to and range of different issues, most notably drugs. Again, I authorised 2 different Section 60 authorisations, and I was in touch with a number of you personally to seek your support in relation to the policing of those Section 60s. And again, I make no apologies for saying it. I appreciate and I'm grateful and thank you for the continued support in what is and can be a very sensitive and highly emotive police power. But through your support, for you getting out there in the community and relaying some of the issues, we received significant positive feedback and praise. So for that, I'm grateful. Op iodine, I want to touch on briefly. You'll all be aware that on the 3rd of January, we had the tragic incident murder of a 13-year-old boy in Caversham. That was a major crime investigation that saw a significant number of officers come into Reading, almost akin to that we saw when we had the Forbury Gardens terrorist incident. The major crime investigation supported by Reading LPA and the community of Reading ultimately responded in 5 people being arrested. As we speak now, 2 of those are on bail, but 1 girl and 2 boys have been charged with that murder. We continue to work tirelessly around the community impact and reassurance and working to support the local community in relation to the aftermath of that. And at the time, we saw a phenomenal amount of resources across Reading, not just in Caversham, to try and offer some reassurance in relation to that. And then the final one on here is in relation to Evermore, which is a continued operation we're still doing now, which is a high profile police operation around increased patrols for supporting the sex workers within Reading, but targeting unlawful prostitution and the associated antisocial behaviour and offences that come out of that. That has been a big success. It's seen an increase in the number of people arrested, which then seen a decrease in the associated ASB. For example, across some of the wards that have been involved, so most notably Abbey and Battle, we've seen an 8% decrease in antisocial behaviour in that area. Could we move on to the next slide, please? And then very briefly, I'll just touch on some headline figures for Reading. So the past 12 months, you can see there, we've seen reductions across all crime by 4%. Most notably, a 20% reduction in residential burglary and an 18% reduction in personal robbery and a 12% reduction in violence. We've also seen reduction in sexual offences and shoplifting. However, we have seen an increase in domestic abuse incidents. That's a 13% increase, and some of that's down to some of the fantastic partnership working around increasing the reporting, the trust and confidence in Thames Valley Police to manage those incidents. With that, we've seen a 20% increase in the number of offenders brought to justice, which is kind of shows that actually once people are reporting, we are doing everything we can to, with our partners, with yourselves, to support those victims and make sure that they're, where we can, those offenders are brought to justice and we have a prevention of any further offending. As far as solved crime, as I said before, we've seen in the last couple of months, we've seen an additional 200 solved crimes. We have seen an increase over the last 12 months of 8.5% across the board for solved crimes. A lot of those are sexual offences and violence against the person that you can see there, but generally across the board, we are able to, at the moment, solve more crimes and provide more closure for victims. Sir, can I hand back to you for the last slide?
Thank you, Nick. So if I could go through to challenges to come. Well, there's a little bit around finances. I think we're all in the same boat, aren't we, from a public sector point of view in terms of our confidence in what might happen when we're assessing the impact of COVID and the budgets. We do have a wonderful opportunity around recruitment in terms of that uplift. That's a challenge for us in terms of experience. Our workforce, when they first come in, go to local areas, need to build up their skills and abilities as well. And we continue to work through COVID and all the challenges that will be in the short term and the medium term. Final slide, please, if we could. So final slide, really just the aspiration of the force, really. And this is where I want us to be, delivering an excellent service, and then regarding us as an outstanding force. We get inspections through the formal ways that you would expect, and they are generally positive, and they have been extremely positive in the past, but we definitely want to maintain that. But that's a byproduct of delivering a service to the public. 4 bullet points really, which hopefully just set out the simplicity of the policing mission in many ways, which is the first one is that we stop it happening in the first place. We disrupt crime and prevent it. And then if we're unable to do that, when people need us, they call us and we get there quickly after answering the phones empathetically. And then where crimes are committed, we seek justice and investigate. And then ultimately, for the things that you have experienced within Reading itself, for regarding it as a good example or a tragic example of that, is that where we have major serious incidents, we're able to respond as a force to the types of things that we're presented with. And if those are the kind of things that we're getting right, then hopefully the trust and confidence of you and those you represent will be high. And the simple measure for Thames Valley Police is that when things are at their worst for people, we need to be at our very best, and that's my mission, to ensure that we are. Thank you, Chair. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, John and Nick. I'm going to take a number of questions were submitted in advance from 4 members, so I'm going to do them the courtesy and take them first in the following order: Councillor Barnett Ward, then Councillor Rowland, then Councillor Duveen and Councillor White. And I've also been notified by Councillor Jones and Councillor Ennis that they have questions. So we'll work our way through those. And Anthony Stansfeld, as Police and Crime Commissioner, you'll want to come in, I think, and please, as we can't see you, we can at least hear you. So you're still there, I take it?
I'm still here, yes. I'll come in when necessary. Right.
OK, thank you. Councillor Barnett Ward, would you like to put your question, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is a question for Mr Stansfield. Other members of the committee may or may not know that I'm Reading's representative to the Thames Valley Police and Crime Panel. Back in, I think it was September, we had the information that we've just had shared here about BAME recruitment brought to the panel. And in that discussion, I asked for information on the recruitment demographics per LPA, recognising that there is a variation of demographics across Thames Valley. Reading and Slough will have a different demographic makeup to Buckingham. We talked about the importance of an LPA reflecting the community it serves, which I was very pleased to hear the Chief Constable emphasise just now in the presentation. And I also asked for information on how the demographics at senior levels of the force relate to demographics at entry-level positions and evidence of equality of progression through the force. I'm still waiting for those figures. I also pointed out the importance of not always lumping everybody into a BAME clump, because the experience of discrimination and oppression is different from people from different backgrounds. And if we stick everybody in together, we're going to miss important information about the challenges and barriers that people are facing. So I would still like that information, but as part of that discussion, when I asked about measures to ensure equality of access to opportunities for career progression for officers from diverse backgrounds, the Chief Constable and the PCC said that it was predominantly white at the senior levels. And Mr Stansfield made the comment that if they have the talent, they will rise to the top. I would like to know, in the time since then, whether Mr Stansfield has reflected on unconscious bias, on the barriers to progression that people from different backgrounds face, and whether he would still stand by that comment, or whether he now thinks that there is more that Thames Valley Police has to do to ensure equality of opportunity for everyone who joins the force. And does he agree that senior leadership have a responsibility to ensure that each LPA looks like the community it serves at every level? Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yes. Anthony Stansfield, do you want to go first?
The Chief Constable has made that quite clear, I hope, in his presentation, that we will do that. But one thing I will point out, the proportion of people joining the police now from BAME backgrounds is clearly much, much higher than it was. To reach the senior ranks of the really senior ranks of the police, you've got to be in the police for 10, 15 years or so. and that proportion was much, much smaller 10 or 15 years ago. But it will, of course, work its way through the system, and we will find that we have far more senior officers from a BAME background. And certainly, we've had very senior officers at assistant chief constable level and chief superintendent who have been from BAME backgrounds, and we still do. And that proportion will rise over the next few years.
Chief Constable, do you want to pick up on points that Councillor Barnett-Ward just raised?
Well, I think if she raised them at the police and crime panel, then I'm sure that is where those particular questions, she will get a proper answer to them, a detailed answer.
Chair, I can add.
Yes, John.
Sorry. Yeah, well, just to really endorse the comments of the councillor, really. So certainly more recently, the last number of years, that the BAME, and I do absolutely take the point. I think it's very dangerous if we homogenise groups into one, because that definitely doesn't do anybody any favours. Just on particular around that, I think I've talked about the positive action engagement team. I think that it's important that we get the volume of numbers of people from a variety of backgrounds into the force in the first place. So that's the recruitment push I talked about, and some encouraging signs. So as I say, in the last 18 months, double the amount of recruits that are coming from a BAME background. We have also just developed a BAME officer development program, and that's for officers from diverse backgrounds who would want to progress through the ranks, and we can help develop them and give them the support that they need to get through to the rank of chief inspector as a starting point. In terms of gender and diversity, the force has about 54% female generally. That's not officers, I'll come back to that. That's just generally female members of staff, and for officers it's 34%. I'm pleased to say in the last round of chief inspector processes, so that is your almost like the first rank of middle to senior management, we saw an increase of 6% in terms of female representation, and for the first time probably that I'm aware of, we have almost half numbers of superintendent ranks across the whole of the resources across Thames Valley that were made up of female officers. And to Anthony, the Commissioner's point, Councillor, which I'm sure you understand, it's by getting those numbers throughout the ranks that we will see the benefits, and that's where we want to see around all our aspects of diversity across the force. So definitely more work to do. No one's complacent about this, but definitely the aspiration is much more representation and diversity.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Councillor Karen Rowland.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Chief Constable for his presentation this evening and the follow-up by Superintendent John. I am broaching a question which I have asked before when you all make your annual presentation, and I have been a challenging and harsh critic, I guess one could say, of the effectiveness of 101 and 999 and your online reporting systems. I do appreciate the slides that you included this year that showed that things are improving, certainly with 101 from the high that you experienced at the end of 2018 down to a more reasonable answering time. But that answer also comes for you all in terms of online reporting, where I also noticed that you registered a large jump from 20 some odd thousand to 88,000, I believe, that are doing online reporting. I'd also draw your attention to the fact that online reporting, we did a test trial this weekend, and for one drug deal in my neighborhood, it took over 20 minutes online for a resident to file that one drug deal report online. So my point is more to the fact that it's not really fit for purpose. The systems that we have are not actually helping the people that are trying to use them. If we think about the fact that you do not have police officers everywhere, and there's a certain reliance on the community to actually provide you that information, then that system that the community is supposed to use really needs to work for that community. The job is then, therefore, to take that information and work it back through your systems. But if you don't have systems that the community is going to use, then how can you expect to have reporting? My concern with 101, with the challenges with 101 and online reporting, is that many crimes and ASB go unreported every day. I think you know that I do live in a challenging area of town, and I speak often of the Oxford Road area where I live. I had even this weekend an email from a resident on Wayland Street who described in very long detail about the difficulties that she has on her streets in terms of ASB and drug deals, and how she's trying to work from home, manage a child. And again, she said, I literally could be on all day long to 101 or all day long online reporting because the crime and the ASB is so frequent. But we're really missing that capture and missing that information to you all. We had another hotspot area over off Russell Street earlier this past year when it came to autumn time, and we were trying to encourage the police to come over and please help us with this issue. I got an email back from one of the police officers that said that you all don't have that information. The last crime and drug deal that had been reported was in August, and we were having this conversation in November. But I have a WhatsApp group that is full of roving information about the fact that drug deals are still going on. So we are trying, myself and other leaders in the community are trying to get them to return to reporting to on 101 and online, but as you can see, it takes a long time. My point is that the crime still happens. The ASB is still there, whether it's reported or not. So what I wanted to know, and what the answers I wanted from you all, is what kind of out-of-the-box thinking that you all are doing to make the reporting systems friendlier and more accessible for the users, that being the residents, people like myself and everyone else, and what kind of systems going forward. So many people are using apps, online apps.
You need
it's
to
a faster way. That's really actually it, Councillor Page. So I thank you. That's really my question. What is coming forward on that?
I'm conscious before either the Commissioner or the Chief Constable come in. Councillor Devine, you also raising issues about 101. Do you want to make your point after Councillor Rowland so we can have a response to both, please?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question around 101 calls is the fact that often when I get from residents, the most common issue when reporting incidents on 101 is that there is never any follow-up, and that it feels to them that their report just disappears into a large black hole. And I keep getting people tell me that there is no point calling 101 as nothing ever seems to get done. This generates a feeling of despair at local policing sometimes. So that the question is, what can you do to forge more positive relationships with the people you serve who do not currently see any response to their calls?
Thank you,
Councillor. Shall I take that one, Chair?
Yes, John.
Thanks. What? Do you put to the first point? I mean, 101 is a national system. I resource within my control rooms the numbers of people that hopefully will be answering calls quickly. And as I say, I think we have made progress in that regard. Now, I did say in December the figures were 32 seconds on average for a call. Now, it's interesting because one of the things I am keen on doing is comparing other call handling services across other agencies as well, and that's a bit of work that was commissioned today. You know, one thing is getting better from a policing point of view, which is, but how relative is it and what is people's expectations? Certainly, if there's a crime in progress, as I said, then I would hope members of the public are reporting on the 999s, which is a very quick service to use. I guess in terms of channels and how we improve. I do think we need to work harder at that feedback loop about you tell us and we do something with it. Now, not every little bit of intelligence we get. I mean, we get around 300,000 909 calls and about 1 million 101 calls a year. It varies from year. Those are the kind of numbers that we're dealing with. So there is a degree, I think, of certainly when people first call us, at least having that honest conversation about expectations. Because I think in the absence of that, people may think that they're going to get something that we realistically can't do. But if they know up front you're not going to get that, or thank you for the information, it's logged. What I would say is that from a policing point of view, every little bit of information is logged and in effect sent through and analysed and considered in kind of broad terms or individual terms to the neighbourhood team by the local teams themselves. Now, also, it doesn't. All the systems don't suit everybody, so we have to have quite a rainbow of options. Now, we have seen, significant increase in online reporting. The experience of 20 minutes or so to fill out a form. I don't know how quick the expectation should be to give detailed information about something to the police, but I have to say there is a reality about that. I mean, on average, the average call when you're speaking to somebody is around about 17 minutes generally. So whether or not you're filling a form out online, so there's some challenges there. Going forward, I'm really open-minded about any opportunity that we can have to further develop the kind of contact and the methodology and the simplicity of it. Things are moving very fast, aren't they? One of the challenges that we have is what might seem like very simple apps in the world of normal lives just can't go on national police systems. And that can be sometimes because the service provider is from a different jurisdiction, because then we open up ourselves in terms of issues around national security and some of the data that we hold. So, but I'm really happy to look at a variety of options. I think in general terms, and it's to the point, is that it's one of the areas that I think that lets us down, which is all the great work that we talk about, that Nick's talked about and I've talked about. I think that feedback loop to members of the public when they contact us might be sometimes higher than they might, or maybe their expectations sometimes are higher than we can actually ever meet. But I think we can do better in this regard, and certainly satisfaction rates are going to be a big part of this year and next year. And only last week we had a victim satisfaction week across the force, encouraging officers and staff to think about the impact on the community.
Okay, thank you. Anthony, do you have anything to add to that, or shall I move on to the next question?
No, in an ideal world, I'd like every call answered almost instantly, and that's to rush out on every drug deal that somebody reports. We can get someone. I think we are limited in our capacity sometimes to do everything that we would like to do. We are getting a significant uplift of police officers, which the Chief Constable has described. And the vast majority of those will be going to local LPAs, so Reading will get extra police officers. So I hope our reactions will be quicker in the future. And also, of course, very often when a drug deal or something is going on, what people probably are not aware of is there's probably covert action going on at the same time, which we do not make public. And that is sometimes a little bit awkward for us. But I would hope that the reaction times will be much better in the future when we have more officers. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, Councillor White.
Thank you, Councillor Page. This question is on using CCTV cameras to find drivers for dangerous driving. At the junction of Wokingham Road and Eastern Avenue, it's illegal to do a right-hand turn from Wokingham Road into Eastern Avenue. Another example of a dangerous manoeuvre in the area is cars doing an illegal right turn out of Granby Gardens through the Green Man phase of the pedestrian crossing, which, as people can imagine, is very dangerous, and heading up the Wokingham Road. Residents are deeply concerned about these ongoing examples of dangerous driving, which have been raised with the police over the years. There are a number of CCTV cameras at Cemetery Junction. I've spoken from someone from the council's CCTV team, and I understand that these can be monitored by police staff. And I also understand that it's possible for the police to use this CCTV camera footage to fine drivers for dangerous driving. So yeah, is this correct? Can the police do a trial of this or something like it? And if not, what options are available for tackling these issues at the locations given and across the town? And I know that the council is looking at taking some of the powers away from the police to use to do this sort of thing, but I fear that that's going to take some time. Even if we get the powers in the summer, I can't imagine we're going to be able to use them for a little while the council gets up to speed. So that's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor White. Who's going to respond to that? John or Nick?
I can take it first, Chair, and then hand over to Nick for a local's perspective, if that's okay.
John?
Well, yeah, thanks, Councillor. I mean, the update I received, because thank you, you gave it us in advance, is that Reading CCTV, in terms of from a police point of view, are under the impression that cameras owned by Reading Borough Council in terms of that particular junction. So I raise it. I hope that's correct. That obviously has a potential impact on who's watching what at any one particular time. I think in terms of generally cameras can be used for enforcement activity. Normally they are linked to ANPR, if that makes sense, which is quite a lot of technology thrown onto a particular camera because it automatically reads the number plate and can then do the enforcement almost as an automated process rather than having someone just watching a junction, which with modest CCTV operators, I'd probably be loath to allocate that as a particular task when they are looking primarily for crime and disorder. That's not to say it's not an important issue, traffic safety. Certainly in terms of traffic management, I'm pleased to say the update I've had is that we've had no collisions at that junction. That doesn't mean that it's not going to happen because the rules are there for a particular reason in terms of traffic management, but thankfully that we haven't had any collisions at that location. I think generally it can be very frustrating for people when they see people breaching what appear to be quite straightforward traffic signals and traffic signs. So there are options, but they are very expensive ANPR enabled cameras, or at least they are an expense. And I think we just have to be balanced about what we would collectively be able to achieve from a CCTV point of view. Nick, I don't know whether or not you're familiar with that particular junction or any of the issues with the neighbourhood team might be able to assist us all.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Councillor, I'm aware, obviously, the issue you raise, and just to reiterate the points that whilst I appreciate the absence of collisions, doesn't mean that illegal turns aren't happening. But when we look at it against the threat, harm and the risk and the things that we've been discussing that we are dealing with at the moment, that risk is low at the present time. And therefore, when we're trying to offset it against everything else that we're trying to manage in the face of the challenges brought on by those serious incidents we've mentioned, by the increase in certain areas of crime and disorder, as well as the COVID, at the moment, it's trying to manage all that against the threat, harm and risk. So yeah, I am aware. We have flagged it with our neighbour team when they're on patrols, but there is no plans presently within my taskings and the assets under my command to do anything more targeted in that area.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In fact, it builds on that last question and answer. First of all, thank you, Mr. Campbell, for your presentation and for the work that you and your officers do 24/7 every day of the year. In Reading, we're all too familiar with the day-to-day challenges of juggling limited resources. So it's right to acknowledge that the Chief Constable will need to prioritise how available resources are deployed in fighting crime in all its form, whether that's the scourge of illegal drugs, cybercrime, terrorist threats and the rest, as well as being buffeted by major unplanned events or incidents. So against that background, it is a matter of some frustration that the reputation of Thames Valley Police is undermined every day by the apparent lack of effective enforcement of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in our residential areas. When we consult on what Reading Borough Council can do, perhaps using road humps, road narrowing and the like, the answer we get far and away from our residents, the clear number one measure people want are speed cameras, which would see those who chose to race around our streets being fined. These are our residents' priorities. Reading Council has repeatedly told Thames Valley Police that we want to do this, but we are only offered limited and occasional support. What will Thames Valley Police do to help us take on these matters and perhaps leave you and your officers to concentrate on your other priorities? Until we do, I fear Thames Valley Police will fail in its ambitions to be seen as offering an excellent service by an outstanding force by very many law-abiding residents in our town.
Thanks, Councillor.
John, just before you come in, can I just underline the point I made to you and Anthony Stansfeld and Matt Barber in the email so far unresponded to on the 6th of January about our wish to take over or at least share the enforcement of 20 mph and general speeding problems in Reading. Thames Valley Police appear to be very resistant, unnecessarily so, to a legitimate request to take over those powers, particularly as we're now going to be given the moving traffic offences powers by the government later this year. We could do a better job than you because you rightly have prioritised it very low, but it's a high priority for our residents. There's a win-win if you would work with us to see those powers either transferred to us or shared in a way that would then deliver effective enforcement in Reading. Over to you, John and Anthony.
Thanks. Shall I come in first? I mean,
yes, go ahead, Anthony.
I've never been more delighted, I think, probably than the police if they had the traffic enforcement removed off them and give them more time to deal with all the other crimes. I don't think it's quite as simple as that, though. It is a complicated legal process, and of which I think my deputy Matthew Barber is dealing with this at the moment and looking into it. But John, do you have any comments on that? Because, I mean, ideally, one would rather like to hand it over, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. Chair, regarding your email in, I'm afraid I've not had visibility of that one. I will check on that when I go back into the office. Forgive me if there's been a delay. Very happy to look at that and consider what the options are. I think quite often from a policing point of view, we're asked the question around enforcement of 20-mile-an-hour limits, and I think the kind of like the answer that sometimes come back is that we can't commit to doing the enforcement over and above all the other stuff as a matter of course, if that makes sense. But if there's a 20-mile-an-hour limit and a police officer's there doing enforcement, and there's a breach of that, well, that's a breach of the local traffic regulations for that area, and we would take action. I sometimes don't think we do ourselves any favours in sometimes how we answer the question, if that makes sense. Because just to the councillor's point around frustration from the community, I understand how it would appear that if the police don't seem interested in doing traffic management, and that's the biggest issue for your local community, why they'd be frustrated. I don't want that. If you allow me, Chair, to take that away in the content of your email, and I will endeavour to get you a response by the end of the week, and consider all the points you make, if that's okay.
I will resend it to you, John, along also with our submission to the Department for Transport's consultation on roads policing last autumn, which we made where we set out our stall, and I'll also make sure you're sent that. But we would like to actively engage with Thames Valley Police, if as a pilot, but with the moving traffic offences powers going to be given to local authorities, there's clearly a synergy here between the sort of local examples raised by councillors White and Jones and our wish to deliver more effective enforcement. And we believe that we could take workload off you and at the same time deliver a much more effective enforcement. So thank you for that response, and I would look to work with you and colleagues on that. The final question then from Councillor Ennis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation today. I want to start as a representative of the community in Southcote, that the community, myself and local councillors are extremely appreciative of the work that you do for the community in combating crime and antisocial behaviour particularly in difficult circumstances. Whilst some of us will balk at going out, you have no choice but to go out and do your daily job, and I think that needs to be appreciated. The concerns and criticism, well, I wouldn't use the word criticism, the concerns of the community in Southgate is that there's few of you because of the cuts that's taken place over the past decade, and very much look forward to getting extra policing. The significant antisocial behaviour, which, thanks to Superintendent Nick John, who met with us, Southgate councillors, to discuss one major antisocial behaviour issue in Southgate. And the question I want to ask about community policing, because our area, and I think all areas in Reading, really appreciate community policing when it works well, and what the plans are with the increased policing in the next few months in Reading, what you're going to do with regards to community, because more visible policing has a real positive effect on the communities and what the plans are. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. I'll talk in general terms around neighbourhood policing and then hand over to Nick from a local point of view. So we're very committed to neighbourhood policing. We would all accept there's not many as neighbourhood police officers as we might want, and generally not lost over the recent years around about 700 or so police officers and significant amount of police staff, all of whom were doing many of whom were doing operational roles. So that's the challenge. The uplift is helpful. It's going to take a little bit of a while to come in. We've already allocated officers to Reading, and our officers, there's an additional 20 officers at this stage out of that first wave that are coming to Reading to support that. Neighbourhood policing is an important part of the strategy, and involves police, PCSOs and PCs as well. And the PCSOs are very important because they are able and have an ability and a job role which is much more visible, and they are less abstracted away from areas. Although what we have done over recent times is completely ring fence all the neighbourhood teams. So whilst there's not as many as they were, and I would accept that, or as we would want, but they are ring fenced just to concentrate, and abstractions are limited. What we do know, and we treat this very preciously, is that there are many jurisdictions in the world where the community wants to see far less of their police rather than more, and we should treat that, as I say, as a precious gift that the community wants to see more of their police rather than less at the moment. I will do all I can. Neighbourhood policing as a structure is here to stay. I'm not merging teams, I'm keeping them separate. I want to see more officers doing neighbourhood policing, not less. Nick, I don't know whether or not you've got a local view for the councillor.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Chief. Yeah, Councillor, as you know, we've had conversations around my concerns and the want and need to maximise the relationship we have with yourselves and the other councillors in that area. Within more locally, so we've reviewed and redesigned our problem-solving teams that are a part of the neighbourhood policing teams to make sure that they're more visible and they're tackling the problems such as the ones we discussed personally. I've also realigned and invested in supervision into the neighbourhood team, covering the outers, so those parts outside of the town centre, so that the police constables who line manage the PCSOs can get out more and be more visible rather than doing any supervision work for the PCSOs. And that's starting to really come to fruition, and starting to see far more officers out and about. In addition to that, since I came in, we've revamped and completely changed the tasking process, so that anybody can raise an issue with a tasking, and then we can assign resources from across the LPA to support that. So if there's a neighbourhood issue in Southcote, then we can actually set that as a tasking for a 2 or 4 week period, and really invest in that area with that visibility, supported, led by the neighbourhood officers that know the community so well. So we are responding to that, but again, I'm not going to completely rule out the fact that you raise a really valid point, in that there is a lot of demand across Reading and we need to respond accordingly. But absolutely, I value and truly believe in neighbourhood policing, and hopefully that's borne out from certainly from my level right the way down the LPA, from the fact that I do attend as many forums as I can, engage with yourselves as much as I can to make sure that message is clearly delivered right the way through the LPA.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just before you gentlemen leave, the Chief Executive, Peter Sloman's asked for a quick word. Peter?
Yeah, hopefully that's worked, has it, Tony? Can I just take the opportunity as head of paid staff to thank your force through the Chief Constable for all the support you've given us in the year. I mean, it's been an exceptionally challenging year in Reading for all the reasons you laid out at the beginning of your presentation, but we're very aware as council officers that it's the police that run towards trouble and help us enormously in dealing with the impact on the community of the issues that we've had. Our local commander, Nick, we couldn't hope for a better local commander. He's certainly the best of the force in terms of the support he gives us in terms of partnership. So I just want to lay on record our gratitude for all the help and support we've had.
I would certainly underline that point. Yes, John, was that?
Well, it was just really thank you very much. And I you know, notwithstanding the questions and absolutely legitimate questions that you've raised tonight, we do recognise that the support from the local authority. The challenge for my police officers, particularly during COVID, is that they have to police in an environment where they've got one aspect of enforcement, but they're also at the same time engaging with members of the public and taking perhaps some of the risks home to their families. And they've done it without, as your staff have done as key workers. So, but they've done it without hardly a murmur, and I'm very proud of them. And I know we don't get everything right, but thank you for your comments about the things that we do.
Good. Okay, well, thank you again, gentlemen, for your attendance. And we look forward to continuing the close working relationship at local level as well. So thank you again for that this evening. And we'll now, with that, we'll move on to item 11, which is the Adult Social Care Asset Review and Capital Strategy. I think Zelda is introduced in this, or is it Melissa?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start and then Zelda's going to follow.
Hey, Melissa.
Thank you, Chair. So this report, this extensive report outlines a summary of the Adult Social Care Asset Review and associated recommendations which have been developed over the recent months with colleagues in housing. In adult social care in-house provision, we support some of Reading's most vulnerable service users, and yet the current accommodation is not sufficient to meet the current or projected demand due to the structure, layout and inability to adapt the current buildings. So this review's provided us with a real opportunity to work with our housing colleagues on the proposed development of multi-use sites, which not only realise our vision in adult social care of modernised services that could meet the needs of our service users, but also to meet some of the council's wider housing objectives. Through this work, adult social care have been able to predict future demand over a longer period of time, which hasn't been possible before, and it has enabled us to put forward some informed proposals about the size of the asset base going forward and form the basis of our capital strategy. This cross-cutting work has enabled us to look beyond the existing adult social care sites mentioned in the report and look at wider opportunities to configure options to meet needs. And this has resulted in recommendations for Battle Street and Hexham Road outlined in the report, which gives us prime locations for some much valued mental health supported living flats, day and respite opportunities for people with profound learning disabilities and older people's dementia service, along with shelter housing and general housing. This also allows for consolidation of our services across reduced number of sites, which means we can share staffing and provide continuity of care for our service users. I'm just going to pass to Zelda to talk more about the sites.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Chair. The clients of adult social care and housing are not mutually exclusive, and this offers a real opportunity to deliver housing and services together to meet a range of different needs. Some of our current sheltered housing flats do not fully meet the needs of customers who may be frail or who have mobility issues due to their inability to install lifts, or that they're in locations that are far from local amenities or from shops. The ability to deliver new sustainable homes with modern facilities in line with what our customers need today is really exciting for us. Our existing customers and new customers will benefit from that. Those tenants who are struggling to manage in larger homes will have the opportunity to downsize to a new home and release accommodation for families on the housing register. Developing new homes together alongside an older person's day centre provides an exciting model of delivery that enables a cross-fertilisation of services that will improve the well-being of both services customers. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased to see this report put in front of the committee. Sometimes councils can be accused of working in silos, or departments or sections within councils can be accused of working in silos. I think this is a really good example of that cross-cutting approach, which I believe has provided a proposal which is far better than I could have hoped for when we started the kind of strategic review of our assets in adult social care nearly 3 years ago. Then we just started looking at what we had available to us in adult social care. But by broadening the brief, and I thank Melissa Wise for driving this through, by broadening the brief, I think the possible solutions that have been put forward today are not just better and more exciting and all the rest, but simply more appropriate to the needs that we can foresee over the years ahead. In proposing that we move forward on this basis, sometimes people talk about a win-win solution. Well, while trying to avoid hyperbole, I would suggest to the council and to the committee that this provides a win-win-win solution for the council. Win in terms of better provision for the people that we seek to support in adult social care. Win in terms of better opportunities for housing development sites around the town, which are freed up through this process. And we can't ignore it, a win in terms of better value for money, and in the longer term, saving the council money. So saving the council money, better services and better housing development prospects. Chair, I commend this report to the council. It speaks for itself, but I would be happy to respond to any comments that other councillors may wish to raise.
Thank you. Councillor Ennis and then Councillor Duveen.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and totally echo all the points that have been made. I think this is an excellent piece of work going forward that's going to have a positive outcome in adult social care and for housing opportunities, increased housing opportunities. The point I want to make is the Battle Street 74 flats and the Hexham Road sheltered housing is part of a strategy. It's part of a long-term strategy which includes housing, using the housing revenue account to good value in providing decent, top quality, zero carbon housing, which is 100% affordable for those who need it in our town. Despite the problems that we're faced with nationally and the obstacles, we're going ahead with plans to build as many houses as possible, houses and flats, and this is just part of that strategy, and very much welcome it, and very much welcome the use of the HRA to make sure this is possible, and look forward to seeing the houses being built and the people going into them getting that opportunity and improving their lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duveen.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I absolutely support the outcome of this review, but as a bit of an outsider on adult social care, one or two things didn't seem to be quite logical to me, and I just want to understand a bit more. So, for instance, when we're talking section 6, there's a table about profound and multiple learning disability day opportunities. there's a note that says, whilst the numbers of people requiring the service grow rapidly, we are retaining a broadly similar size service. And again, similar problem on respite services in section 4.7. The rationale in the table indicates that whilst the number of people requiring the service grow rapidly, we are retaining a broadly similar size service. That sounds like we are planning to reduce the service we can offer. So I just wondered whether you could explain how we are attempting to provide a similar service for a growing number of people.
Which officer wants to respond to that first?
I can answer that, Chair.
Melissa?
So the reason that we're able to offer to more people with the similar size service is because we're looking to broaden the timings of the service. So currently both the day service and the respite are offered during limited periods during the day, so shorter days or over less days of a week. So what we're planning is to look at a different service model where we're offering a longer service, which means that we can have that open to more people. And that's really the basis of the conclusion that we've reached. The other element that's linked to that is that a number of the service users that access the day service also access the respite service. So this way they can have continuity of care, but without the need for additional staff.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Skeets.
Thank you, Chair. Well, we welcome this report and support the comments just been made by Councillor Jones and Councillor Ennis. It makes sense, and I see. Well, from reading the papers, to me, it appears that the council are honouring their commitment to build more council housing in the areas set aside for this purpose. So we welcome this report and we will be voting for it this evening. Thank you.
Okay, I haven't seen any other indications to speak. Councillor Jones, was there anything you wanted to say by wind up?
Well, I thank Melissa Wise for her answer. I suppose a more ugly phrase would be, we're going to sweat the assets. Actually, we're going to use the resources we have more efficiently. Perhaps I can just say, while I get the opportunity, I'm also grateful, Chair, for your support and the support of the Abbey Ward councillors, because I'm also really pleased to see that the logic of having some significant facilities towards the centre of the town, I think, are critical to the success of these plans. So thank you also for your support and guidance in that matter.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Yes, certainly the Abbey councillors fully support this, and the synergy with the existing Trinity Place flats and the facilities there is made in the report. Nobody has indicated any opposition to this. Rather than do a roll call, can I take it there's unanimous support for this recommendations?
It's unanimous from me.
Agreed.
Agreed.
That's all the recommendations on page 24. Good, thank you very much indeed. That leads then on to the supporting report, agenda item 12, and the necessary land appropriation. Zelda, are you dealing with this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This report is linked to the previous report, the Adult Social Care Review and Capital Strategy. The report seeks authority to classify the sites at Battle Street, Amethyst Lane, Hexham Road and Wire Road as surplus to general fund requirements, and to transfer them to the housing revenue account for the consideration of housing development effective from the 1st of April 2020. So Battle Street is the old central pool site, and the other three sites are redundant sites previously used by adult social care for provision that is no longer required for that particular purpose. The report also seeks authorisation for the Assistant Director of Legal and Democratic Services to be authorised to carry out the relevant appropriation. The transfer will result in a debt saving to the general fund of £462,000 per annum and a subsequent additional cost to the housing revenue account of £342,000 per annum. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ennis.
Yes, just want to supplement that, the comments from Zelda. I think we should also want to thank the team, the housing team, for the excellent work they're doing in very difficult and challenging circumstances. A small team that Zelda manages in doing works in a strategic manner. And just want to make the comment about efficiencies, that the council often gets criticised, and sometimes quite rightly, quite frankly. We have to take it on the chin about inefficiencies and waste and value for money, which is fair enough. But I think also we want to look at positions and situations that the council are doing, which will save money without cutting services and potentially enhancing services. So the saving of £462,000 per annum annual saving on the appropriation of these 4 pieces of land into the housing revenue account, I think, is to be welcome. I would say that the plan then going forward in the HRA is to look to build council houses, and I very much welcome this report as part of that. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you, Councillor Ennis. Nobody else has indicated to speak. Can I again assume there's unanimous support for the recommendations on page 65?
Agreed.
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 Thank you very much indeed. We'll move on then to agenda item 13, which is the supported living rent increase from April this year. Melissa, you're introducing.
Thank you, Chair. So as outlined in the report, there are currently 54 units of accommodation across 14 properties that are ring-fenced for supported living for adult social care service users. The rents on these properties were last reviewed back in June 2017, and therefore this report outlines a proposed rent increase for some of the properties within that cohort, and a mechanism for setting future rents going forward in a fair and equitable way. Due to the nature of the scheme known as specialist supported living, there is no prescribed way to calculate rents. And as outlined in section 4 of the report, there were a number of options for us to consider. However, the proposed option in 4.9, which is recommended, considers the rent in line with LHA guidance, which provides the best indication of what is appropriate for these properties, is applicable to the area and is in line with housing regulations, and doesn't provide a disincentive to the service users to seek employment, as they won't be personally impacted from a financial perspective. This would mean that 6 properties would be subject to an immediate increase. Furthermore, the report outlines in section 4.11 an ongoing increase is applied to all the properties, which is also in line with social rent and affordable properties. So going back to the recommendation, we're seeking to increase the rents on those affected properties in line with LHA, and put forward an ongoing increase linked to Consumer Price Index from April 21. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. And briefly, just wanted to reinforce a comment there made by Mrs. Wise. I mean, for me, this is about fairness, and although we deal with sensitive issues, I can't defend the fact that rents in this area have not been increased since 2017. And although we don't seek to catch up from that position, I don't think it's a position that we can maintain, or indeed should maintain, in fairness and equity to others. But you will see in 4.9, as has already been highlighted, that 48 shared accommodation rent will remain the same, bar for the small increase. And in terms of the 6 one-bedroom self-contained flats, all individuals will continue to have their rent paid by welfare benefits and will not see any impact on their personal finances. So in that regard, I mean, nobody likes to put forward rent increases, but I do think in fairness and equity across the council, I think this is something that we now need to move on.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I've not had any indications to speak on this item. So can I assume there is support for the recommended action in 2.1?
Agreed.
Good. All unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on then to item 14, which is the local authority new build Wensley Road estate improvements. Zelda Wolfley.
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks spend approval as set out in the Part 2 report for the delivery of 46 new homes, 25 garages and wider estate improvements within the Wensley Road estate area in Minster Ward. The report also seeks delegated authority to tender and enter into contracts for the construction and the wider improvements to the estate. It also seeks approval to appropriate a number of garage sites from the general fund to the housing revenue account for the purposes of housing. This project relates to a council estate in one of the most deprived areas of the borough. It provides a real opportunity to bring improvements to residents by building new homes in line with passive house principles, which will in turn reduce fuel poverty. These homes will be allocated to local people in housing need. All residents on the estate, however, will benefit from the wider estate improvements, including a new play area with modern play equipment, coupled with improvements to the local park known as Courage Park, improvements to parking in the area, and the provision of larger modern garages. There will also be improved landscaping and tree planting and improvements to the built environment, including new cycle storage facilities. Wider project also includes improvements to existing homes, following on from current work to install a new fire alarm system and sprinklers. There will be improvements to the windows and exterior of the buildings and the installation of a new waste management system. The new homes and wider estate improvements will be delivered in phases with full completion by the end of 2022. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ennis.
Yeah, thank you. I want to totally again echo Zelda's points made and note the recommendations. Hope the recommendations are supported. There is a significant amount of money to be spent. Approval of 19.9 million in the report. That's phase 1 and 2. Phase 1 again is the looking at the homes, passive house principles, top quality housing of the best quality, zero carbon neutral, the best green energy buildings you can be seen built in Reading, like all the other council homes that we've built. 46 homes, new garages, and working with the residents and the local councillors to ensure these improvements are going to be realised for the local community. Acknowledge that there has been at the planning some opposition from local residents, and we commit to do a consultation process to bring them with us to understand their issues, but to improve the area and have a positive long-term permanent outcome for all residents in Wensley Road. I think when it's finished, it's going to look excellent. The houses are going to look excellent, and the work to the blocks will certainly improve the lives of the tenants living there. So very much support the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and it's Councillor White you've indicated.
Thank you, Councillor Page. Green councillors support the council building homes to high environmental standards. However, as Green Councillor Josh Williams said on the Planning Applications Committee, we share some of the concerns of the 650 people who signed the petition against this development and the 350 people who objected. We don't support such a loss of public open space, and we did want a smaller development. However, disappointingly, we lost this argument at planning, so we will be supporting the recommended action.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Emberson.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm glad that Councillor White came to that conclusion, because I was worried we were going to do a rerun of the planning committee, and we luckily haven't. Just as a ward councillor, I just wanted to say that I support the recommended action tonight, and fellow ward councillors do too. This is 46 new homes, and there will be a local lettings policy in place so that it will really help Coley residents. And indeed, I've had 2 phone calls from overcrowded residents in the Coley area just this week, so I know that there's a real need that's already been discussed by officers and Councillor Ennis tonight. I also really welcome the enhanced improvements to the estate, and I'm really proud of the council in the work they've done in consulting, and I look forward to planning applications for phase 2 and improvements to the blocks in terms of how they look coming forward, and making the area better for residents, and making sure that that central green space is well used by residents with play equipment for the younger people on the estate. So I welcome this report and support the recommended action.
Thank you, Councillor Emerson. I've not had any other indications to speak. So can I take it that there is unanimous support for these recommendations?
Agreed.
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 Thank you very much, colleagues, which takes us on to item 15, which is the external funding applications for low carbon investment. Ben Burford.
Thank you, Chair. The paper presented to the committee tonight just summarises some of the funding, some of the grants programmes that have recently been announced by the government, specifically by the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, including the Public Sector Decarbonisation Fund and its associated Low Carbon Skills Fund, also the Green Homes Grant Local Authority Delivery Scheme. Both of these grant funds are ongoing with various rounds and various allocations coming forward, and we have been applying to those funds and have secured some, and some are pending. So there's details of the intended applications shown in the report. As these are various allocations available and time frames are very short, it's requested that we have a delegation to be able to spend those funds as and when they are approved and come in. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ricky Devine, Councillor Devine, you've indicated, then Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say a big thank you to Ben Burfoot for bringing in an awful lot of grant money to the borough. I think it's an excellent job of work, and I hope we can see an awful lot of the benefits in the years to come, because a lot of this is going to improve housing stock one way or another. And that is to be welcomed. So just a thank you, really, and we look forward to seeing lots of more money, even if it isn't European money, coming forward.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. It's great to see more action to get homes insulated in Reading. Greens have been calling for this for some time, and we support the recommended action. The council's own housing stock is in far better state than some of the housing in the private sector in the town. In Reading, 10,000 people roughly live in fuel poverty. In these cold winter months, some of our residents are having to choose between eating and heating, and more insulation would mean people could heat their homes for less, and it would reduce fuel poverty. Friends of the Earth estimates that in Reading we need to be insulating around 4,000 homes per year to tackle the climate emergency. I did try and get some figures as to how we're doing in Reading exactly, but I think it's fair to say that we're the council, the government, individuals are insulating nothing like that number, unfortunately. The report mentions the Green Homes Grant scheme, which is available to local residents, as well as the one or the money that's part of the scheme that's available to the council. The resident scheme has many problems, but in theory it could be complementing what the council is doing and insulating many more homes in Reading. For most, the scheme will pay for 2/3 of the cost of installing some energy efficiency measures, up to £5,000. However, if you're in receipt of some benefits, this scheme unlocks £10,000 and there is no match funding requirement from the resident at all. One of the problems with this scheme was the tight deadline, which has now been extended to March 2022. The other problem is finding a Trustmark registered installer, which is one of the requirements, who has the capacity to install the measures. I did look into getting my front door done, but just gave up because no one was returning my calls or emails. It was really disappointing. And if I can't get anywhere as someone that's interested, I can't see how the ordinary resident stands a chance, to be honest. So, as well as the grant applications mentioned, which we will be supporting, I want to know what the council has done looking into what could be done to increase the supply of Trustmark registered installers in Reading, so that more people could take advantage of the money that's out there, which would get more homes insulated in the town, complementing what the council's doing, cutting fuel poverty and creating jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor White. Nobody else has indicated. So, Ben Burfoot, would you like to pick up on the points that Councillor White has just raised?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor White, for your comments. Yes, indeed, the grant scheme runs alongside the Green Homes Grant voucher scheme, which is available more widely to the public, not through the council. But this scheme does require there to be obviously sufficient supply, and with sudden announcements of this nature, it's often a problem that supply is not there to be able to meet that demand. So we are talking to Reading UK about starting to understand what the local supply situation looks like. But as I say, we are focused on trying to deliver our local authority delivery scheme, and so obviously whilst we want to see the wider scheme adopted as well, all we can do really with that is to try to ensure that the economic development and assistance is aligned with that end in mind.
Thank you, Mr. Burfoot. I would just say to Councillor White, clearly the last year of the pandemic hasn't helped matters in terms of taking forward initiatives around this. We hope very much, and I'm sure you would agree with this, that if there is any further investment to have in building back in a greener way, the government should be unlocking substantial billions to invest in home insulation, and that will have not only energy efficiency benefits and lower bills, hopefully, but also act as a major stimulus to the economy and in job creation. So with a looming budget, we have to hope that our representations will fall on sympathetic ground. The other issue that, of course, Reading suffers particularly from is that a large number of houses desperately in need of insulation are owned by non-resident landlords. And therefore, many of their tenants who may be on benefits don't immediately trigger the benefits that owner-occupiers would be able to access. And you represent an area with many of those properties, Councillor White, and so do I. And many landlords are simply failing in their duty to maintain their houses to an adequate standard, whether it be energy conservation or indeed other aspects. So there's a big job of work for the council to do in continuing to lobby government. We will take every opportunity to access and apply for funds, as Ben and his colleagues have been doing. And I would reiterate the thanks that Councillor Duveen mentioned to Ben and colleagues to continue to submit all available to submit applications for all available opportunities. So on that note, I've not heard any dissentient notes from members. Can we agree the recommendations on page 87? Is that
Agreed.
Good, thank you very much indeed, which takes us on to item 16, which is the acceptance of Cultural Recovery Fund grants. Donna Pentelow to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. This report is to advise and accept the award from Arts Council England's Cultural Recovery Fund of £989,374 and an additional £80,500 from the National Lottery Heritage Fund's Cultural Recovery Fund for Heritage. This is part of the £1.57 billion Cultural Recovery Fund made available by government to safeguard cultural and heritage organisations from the economic impact of COVID-19. These valuable funds are used to support the Hexagon and South Street Theatre, Reading Museum, and activities taking place in the Abbey Quarter between the 1st of October and the 31st of March 2021. This allows us to continue to deliver and adapt our services despite the ongoing COVID-19 restrictions. To this end, we're also seeking approval to apply to round 2 of the fund, subject to satisfactory terms and conditions, which opened on the 6th of January and closes for applications on the 26th of January. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowland.
Thank you, Chair. And I would like to thank Donna Pentelow for her report and success in securing these funds. I'd like to remind everyone that there is no guarantee that these funds naturally come to you. The cultural sector has been blighted all over the country, and you have to prove that you've got a good track record, that you're not going to go bankrupt or anything anytime soon. You've got a stable, meaningful business that can continue, and very much so in Reading. We've got that and more. I've taken every opportunity I can to brag about the wonderful level of service and ingenuity that our museums, that the Abbey Quarter, and that our theaters, both the Hexagon and South Street, have made this year, and contributions despite the challenges of COVID-19. So these funds show a great deal of faith from the National Heritage Lottery Fund and the Arts Council England to the cultural offerings that we have with Reading Borough Council, and indeed to the cultural offerings in this town. So I very much am delighted to commend this report and the acceptance of these funds to members, and thank once again Donna and her team for all the great work that they do. Thank you, Chair. You're on mute, Chair.
I knew it would happen once. My apologies. I've not had any requests to speak on this item. Can I take it there's unanimous support for the recommendations 2.1 to 2.3?
Agreed.
Good, thank you very much. Which takes us on to item 17, which is the civil enforcement parking contract and parking strategy update. Giorgio Framelico's here to introduce.
Chair, back in 2014, the council agreed to a 5-year plus 5-year contract with NSL to provide civil enforcement services. Officers reported in January 2020 an update with the intention to prepare for a new contract going forward. This report now updates on that work to date, including explanation of the progress to appoint a specialist contractor, that we've reviewed and developed a parking strategy, and that we proceeded to develop a new procurement strategy. However, further work is now required to ensure that the emerging civil enforcement contract and parking strategy align with the emerging local transport plan that's still being progressed. Of course, it needs to align with the climate strategy that was adopted in November last year, and needs to respond to the changing situation created by COVID-19 and indeed other opportunities or matters that are arising in the near future, such as the moving traffic offences that was referred to you, Chair, earlier on in this meeting. So the report now seeks an extension to the current contract for a further 2 years, although it is hoped that a replacement contract will be in place for October 2022. Thank you, Chair.
I've got nothing to add to that. There've been no indications to speak. Can I?
Sorry, Chair, can I ask a quick question? Councillor White.
Yes, do. Karen?
Yes, sorry, I forgot to indicate. I was just interested, previously there's been talk of bringing the parking enforcement contract back in-house, but I didn't see that mentioned in the report, so I don't know if I missed a previous report or if that option's been discounted for some reason. So I was just interested in officer comment on that, an update on that.
George?
Thank you, Chair. So the intention reported in January last year was to go to into a new procurement, a new contract for that service. But there, as I explained, the situation has changed quite significantly over the last year or so, not least because of COVID, and as I say, they need to align with new strategies. So at this point in time, whilst a lot of work has been done on a new procurement process, there are options being reviewed as to how best to respond to that change in circumstance, how best to respond, for example, to the moving traffic offences situation, and the decision, the final decision as to whether to procure externally, in-source, or a hybrid of the two has yet to be made by the council. That's part of the work that we need to do to get to a new position in the near future.
Okay, thank you. Any other? No. Okay, can I?
Hello, Chair.
Oh, sorry. Yes, you've indicated. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of thoughts. Does the civil enforcement contract include the use of the camera van? And if not, why not? But either way, why are we not considering additional camera van, given that the one that we do have is something of a success? And the other thing that struck me was the use of automatic number plate recognition technology at car park barriers is something that could be utilised, and I wondered whether there was any merit in trying to find a system for charging less for parking a hybrid or electric vehicle whilst charging more for petrol and diesel vehicles. Anything that we can do to facilitate the move to electric vehicles or to simply stop using the most polluting vehicles in town is good news for the climate and for the air quality of the town centre, not to mention the health of some of our citizens. I would just like to say we would strongly support any move to bring enforcement of moving traffic offences into local authority control, because quite simply the police cannot cope with that and all their other pressing matters. And it would be nice to be able to enforce the 20-mile-an-hour limits that we are gradually implementing throughout the town. So yes, we'll be supporting this, needless to say.
Thank you. George?
I think I suppose a couple of headlines really is that it's absolutely right that whatever process we take in terms of civil enforcement going forward, it responds to the latest technology that's available, whether that's automatic number plate recognition or other systems that secure enforcement, but still give security and certainty to local residents that enforcement matters are being covered well in the local area. But Councillor, you've kind of hit on a key issue as well, which is the civil enforcement service needs to be seen as part of that local transport plan objective in terms of air quality and reducing congestion and providing a safe environment for residents to travel and businesses to operate in. So technology is certainly on the agenda, as is achieving those bigger objectives such as air quality and congestion. In terms of the camera van, I'd have to go back and double check in terms of our latest position on that, but we do from time to time review the benefits of further equipment such as a new van or camera van to ensure our enforcement. At the moment, clearly that's probably not the most sensible option given the low levels of enforcement, the low levels of offences taking place at the moment. But that process is always under review in terms of what the best options are for us to deliver the enforcement that residents want to have in their area.
Thank you. If there's nobody else, I would just emphasise the point, Councillor Devine, that we as an authority are on record, as I was reminding the Chief Constable earlier, of wanting to take over speed enforcement responsibilities via cameras particularly, and clearly the news around moving traffic offences, which is referenced on page 158, and that announcement only came last autumn from the DFT. The timetable for giving us those powers is still slightly unclear because the government has said the summer, and that relatively new announcement is an additional reason, as this report makes clear, to further review the wider parking enforcement agenda as well, and that will obviously include the resourcing of that, not only on foot with the use of our civil enforcement officers, but also whether we acquire any further vans. But as you will remember, Councillor Devine, thanks to the coalition government and your own party's involvement in this, the ability to use camera van was severely restricted by your party in the form of Norman Baker and Mr Pickles, both agreeing that these vans could only be used for very limited purposes. If the government changes that, then the case for further vans will be enormously enhanced. So with that, can I put the proposal in respect of recommendations 2.1 to 2.3? Are there any dissentient voices? No. Can we agree those? Thank you very much indeed, which takes us on to the last but by no means least item, agenda item 18, and the proposed response to the latest government consultation to dismantle the planning service. Mark Warringham.
Thank you, Chair. This report deals with a consultation on some proposed changes to the planning system. These proposed changes would be made to the existing system and would be in advance of any of the more sweeping changes proposed in the planning white paper, which we brought to you previously. The first part of the consultation proposes a new permitted development right to change from commercial uses to housing without the need to apply for planning permission. In summer 2020, changes were made to planning use classes, which brought a lot of uses, including retail offices and a number of other commercial uses, together into one class. Some of these uses already had permitted development rights for conversion to housing, such as for offices, for retail, whilst others did not. The proposed changes now propose a new right for all of these uses to change to housing. The second part of the consultation is around public service infrastructure, which is defined in this case as schools and colleges, hospitals and prisons. The purpose is to try to simplify and streamline the system for these uses. The first proposal is for new permitted development rights for expansion on existing sites, and the second proposal is to reduce the time for dealing with planning applications for these uses, which includes reducing the consultation period. The final part of the consultation is around review and consolidation of a number of existing permitted development rights, but there are limited details of how these might change at this stage. The recommendation is to approve the draft response set out as an appendix to the paper and submit that before the deadline of the 28th of January. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Rowland. Oh, so hang on, I'm just trying to see the order. Councillor Devine, were you requesting to speak on this item?
Indeed.
Yes, you've got it just before Councillor Rowland, so I'll call you first and then Councillor Rowland.
Okay, well, thank you, Chair, and thank you for your totally unbiased opening remarks, with which I wholly agree, of course. This whole consultation seems to be based on a Tory party belief that local authorities are the key stumbling block that is clogging up the planning system. As such, it further facilitates conversions of lots of empty office space into flats by reducing the consultation period and restricting grounds for local authorities to refuse planning permission. It does not, though, apparently, restrict the right of the Minister for Housing to overrule local authorities and the Planning Inspectorate to authorise big new developments by his cronies, who then stand to make millions from new schemes. In fact, it doesn't even require the Minister to resign when he's shown to favour his cronies in this way. Nevertheless, I think we are all basically objecting to the changes proposed, as we were for the ones in the summer. So I'd just like to support the recommendations here.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor Rowland.
Thank you, and I might also agree with your opening introduction on this. I wanted to thank Mark Warringham for his responses, again, his very robust remarks to this continued dismantling or attempt to dismantle the way we do business and the way we operate, with a planning applications committee that allows for representation by the community of changes with and to their own community. Mark Warringham also points out the work that we are doing in this town with the High Street Heritage Action Zone and the attention that we are paying to some of our high streets. Indeed, this could easily dismantle the structure of our high streets by allowing retail space to be lost to housing without planning approval. So this is actually something that I'm very happy that we are robustly pushing back on. And we gain nothing as a town, we gain nothing as a local authority without hearing from the community and working with them to help shape our town in the future. This will not get us there at all. And I agree with Mark Warringham's very strong wording and agree to accept this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowland, and I'd also like to place on record my thanks to Mark for a very thorough proposed response to the government consultation. He's been the author of a number of earlier responses that have also been submitted to the government. If there's one headline figure I would draw attention to and colleagues' attention to is on page 170, and that's the loss of affordable housing that we have suffered as a result of the changes in the planning regulations introduced in 2013. And we've lost nearly 600 affordable homes that would have been provided over and above what we've been able to secure as a result of the changes introduced first by the late and unlamented Eric Pickles and sustained by his successors. It is a disgrace that offices can be converted to residential and other changes made without contributing £1 towards the associated infrastructure implications, whether it be transport, whether it be education, whether it be leisure or other benefits that we have to deliver locally. And the affordable housing that we could have provided as well totals at least 570 in that period, and we continue to lose contributions towards all those infrastructure and housing provision. So I've not seen any indications from anybody else, so can I ask the committee's support to submit that response to the department?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. And that concludes this item, this evening's agenda. Can I thank officers and members for their attendance and declare the meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you, Chair. Have a good night.